This year's presidential election would have the fewest number of candidates since 1990. After all the excitement of the nomination process, we're left with just 3 horses in the race. I'm joined by Minister of State and Independent TD Michael Healy-Rae, Labour TD Marie Sherlock and Political Correspondent with Virgin Media News Gavan Reilly. You can send us your comments as always. Does our current system place too much power in the hands of too few people? And is it anti-democratic? Simply scan the QR code or contact us via the WhatsApp number. Michael, are you disappointed Maria Steen came up short?
Well, in the interest of absolute democracy, I think what harm would it have been for a few more people to come along and put their signatures to her nomination paper and allow her the opportunity to go before the people. The people then are the bosses. They would decide. But there's one very interesting aspect of this. We have many independent senators. Now, their electorate, as we will say, are independent councillors throughout the country. Now, I cherish and appreciate the work that our councillors do. But the independent councillors, many of them may have liked the idea of having her on the ballot paper. Now, the independent senators who go to them for their votes, they just choose to stay on the sideline. It's their prerogative if that's what they wanted to do. But the word I'd use for it is, it was a mean act. And it would have been very mean of an independent person. Say, for instance, myself. I'm backing Heather Humphreys because I think she's the best placed person that we have in this country today to be our next president. And I really and passionately believe that. But having said that, I had no problem in coming out early last week because I could see her campaign was getting stuck in gear. It wasn't going this way or that way. And I thought maybe, she could do with a bit of a push. And the word I would use, if I wasn't willing to do that early last week, it would have been mean of me. But I was glad it propelled a few more people belatedly to come to the...
But would you have done that for anybody else or just for Maria Steen?
Well, you see, I have to answer that honestly. Many of the principles and what I would call the things that would be close to her are close to me as well. And we would have had the same alignment in many of the campaigns that have gone on in this country over the last 10 and 15 years. So we'd be together in a lot of our viewpoints on other issues.
So when she today said that there's a hunger out there that will now go unsatisfied, essentially there's an electorate, there are people like you who share those views who will feel they're not represented on the ballot paper. Do you agree with that?
I think what will happen in Ireland today, I think that people who would have never actually thought of her before, they would have thought to themselves, this lady, she's presentable, she's articulate, and she was denied an opportunity because a number of people, and the word I'd use again, were too mean to write their names on a piece of paper. And what harm would it have been? It doesn't mean they would have been supporting her campaign. All they would have been facilitating was democracy. And at the end of the day, we're all Democrats. We live and
But maybe, unlike you, they don't
share
share her views. As you say, you wouldn't have done it for anybody. You did it for her because you share a lot of her views, or you would have been fellow travellers when it came to different referenda maybe over the years. And maybe those independent senators that you're talking about... Yes. That you say were too mean, actually just looked at her views and said, you know what, I don't share those views. So the rationale that applied to Michael doesn't apply to me.
I'd argue that with you. But obviously, when they're not here to talk, I won't go naming people. But there are people, independent senators, who would have shared her views, who would have shared platforms with her in the past. And they were too mean to come out and vote for her. So what other agenda, and the way I'll word it to is, what was up their noses that they wouldn't give her an opportunity? I think it's just, but again, it's their choice, but they'll be judged afterwards on the fact that they were mean with their signature.
Marie, were people too mean with their signature?
Well, I think that's being a bit unfair now to some of the individuals that Michael is alluding to. Look, the reality is the bar is set really low. There's less than 10% of Oireachtas members are required to sign the nomination papers for a presidential candidate. And at the end of the day, if a person can't command even the 20 signatures, then, they're hardly going to be at the races with regards to the election. I think it's also quite disrespectful to the system of local authorities. I think it's quite a good system that there is the choice between the Oireachtas members and local authorities. And that would have also been available to Maria Steen should she have pursued that.
So
as well.
this idea that Maria Steen and that her supporters subscribe to, that there's an electorate out there now that are going to go completely unrepresented, you don't buy into that?
Look, there's three running, in the election, and I think there's a lot of choice there. You've got,
There's not that much choice.
Well, no,
we haven't had this level of choice since 1990.
Well, you do actually, because look, you've got a campaigner and advocate, a fearless and tireless campaigner and advocate in Catherine Connolly. You've got a veteran minister in Heather Humphreys. And then you've got Jim Gavin, who obviously is very accomplished in his own life, but, is untested politically. So they're very broad, but I suppose critically as well.
Do you really think you think that they represent the entire spectrum of opinion in this country?
Well, I think you've got two government candidates there, and you've got a candidate who is supported by, a common left platform at this point in time. I think there's a huge swathe of the country that is covered by that. And at the end of the day, I suppose the onus is on an individual, as I say, to meet that quite low bar in terms of trying to get the nomination process. And if a person doesn't get that, then, I think it's ill-served of the presidency to be talking about trying to lower that bar. It's a very important role with immense, I suppose, influence in terms of being a voice for the people in this country. And I think it's important that we have a process that, with regards to nomination.
Total democratic deficit, says one person at home. Shame on the independents who could have helped her but didn't. Shameful and mean. And a couple of other people talking about spoiling their vote by scrawling Maria Steen across the ballot paper. I spoke to Peadar Tobin about this earlier, who was her big supporter, and he said people should absolutely not spoil their vote. It's an absolute waste of time.
But can I just say as well, respect as well, right? We're all talking now about how we, Ceann Comhairle made a very powerful speech last week about greater respect in politics. And, frankly, the carry-on of some people online towards some of those independent senators was simply unacceptable. So, if you want to win votes, as we know, right, you have to show people respect. You have to look in the whites of people's eyes and show people respect.
Would you have been happier today to have heard some of Maria Steen's supporters, or even Maria Steen herself, call off those attack dogs? And not for a moment to suggest she's responsible for them, but to say, listen, all of that hate that's been directed at people who didn't support me online, that shouldn't be happening.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
It was certainly an issue for the campaign, because there were certainly a couple of people, some of those independent senators, who might have been minded to do it if they thought Maria Steen, who was not responsible for setting the attack dogs on them, had done something maybe to try and becalm things and try and have them be able to pick up their phone without opening up a social media app and seeing themselves being slaughtered on it. On the question of how you exactly get on the ballot, there has to be a threshold somewhere. And no matter where the threshold is, there are going to be some people who are going to get just above that threshold. There's going to be some people who go just below it. In an alternative world, had Labour or the Social Democrats not gotten behind Catherine Connolly, then Sinn Féin's support might have made or broken her candidacy. Because if you only had the Social Democrats, you might have had 11, add PBP's 3, the Green, Soc Dem, or the Redress, Solidarity. You might have struggled to get the 20. So you do require to be something of a coalition builder, but there is going to be a threshold somewhere. One thing that I think went against Maria Steen in her favour, and if you think about this from the practical sense of exactly how you even go into Leinster House, as a member of the public, you can't just walk in and go in and look and see if you can get Michael's vote or Marie's vote or anyone else's vote. You need to be signed in by somebody, you need to be chaperoned. That then in turn means that you are somewhat in the care of the people that got you in the building. You can't just walk around unaccompanied. You need to be accompanied as you go around. And unfortunately for Maria Steen, partly because of the fact that she was juggling the Oireachtas route and the local authority route, she didn't get to spend as much time perhaps in Leinster House as she might have liked over the last couple of weeks. She was still trying to at least go through the motions of the local authority route that was never going to get her over the line. And I'm not saying this to be glib or kind of snooty, but some of the people who were then going around as almost proxies for her, trying to win the votes of Oireachtas members, are not terribly well liked or not universally sympathised with. So
you talk about other Oireachtas members there, people who signed her in.
Some of the Oireachtas members who'd had to sign her in and would have to bring her up to independent TDs or independent senators she's never met before. People who might know her name but might not know her record, have never seen the whites of her eyes, want to talk to her about the running of the world or how her Oris candidacy might be. Those people, you have somebody to make an introduction for you. And some of the people that were making introductions are not universally loved. And that puts you on the back foot immediately when you're trying to get off the mark and trying to get from 0 to 20.
Michael?
I'm spoiling because I'm just thinking about what Gavin is saying there, and it's a very important point. I always say when a candidate is running for any election, be it a local or a national election, and when you knock on somebody's door, the most important person in the world, of course the candidate has to be presentable and be able to state their case, but a very important person is the person who's standing alongside you. In other words, the local person that's with you in that local community. And we as politicians, we know this firsthand. And I word it always this way: you're as good as the person that's in the car with you going around.
So, sorry, are we suggesting Marie Steen didn't make it onto the ballot because of the people she associated herself with?
No, I'm sure. Look, you can talk for us.
Yeah, but that sounds like what you were saying, Gavin.
It is one of a few reasons, but it is one of them.
It means a lot when you were before somebody asking them to support. They look at who's with you. But look, we could analyse this forever. We are where we are now. And this thing about people spoiling votes or anything like that, that wouldn't be right. Again, we have to live by democracy. Unfortunately, what has happened, a candidate has been denied, but I think that I just think it would have been a better election to have 4 people on it. And again, my colours are firmly nailed to one person, and I want that person to win, and that's Heather Humphreys. But at the end of the day, we can't change it now. The clock has gone. And all we can do is look back on this and think afterwards.
Should we change it in the future?
Well, no, because we have to set a bar, because you remember...
But you could... I'm not saying you don't have any standard and you let any Tom, Dick or Harry kind of put their name on the ballot paper. But you could change it. Independent Ireland today are talking about including MEPs, maybe, in the 20, Oireachtas members. It'd be Oireachtas plus MEPs. Or that you wouldn't need councils, you would need maybe a certain amount of councillors.
Things like that could be looked at. But at the end of the day, one lesson that has to be learned for every candidate, and again, politicians that have been around for a while, they realise this. Maria's campaign, and I don't want to be critical of it, but I'll be factual about it. It came in too late. You only get in this world what you work for. Nothing falls onto your lap. You have to go out, and if you're looking to get elected to a local authority, the first time I ever ran for a council, I gave 12 months canvassing for a council seat, 7 days a week, because I didn't want to lose.
Yeah.
And you have to put a lot of effort and slogging into it. You can't sort of come in a hurry and think, that you're going to fly in. And I think she was a victim of time.
All the democratic deficit arguments, they are undermined by that point. She came very late in the day. We talk about 1990, the last time we had 3 candidates on the ballot paper. Mary Robinson's campaign started in January. Maria Steen started about 3 weeks ago. And
it's relatively late in the day, but also then again the fact that she was juggling the Oireachtas route, which was kind of kick-started by Patrick the Beans caucus, which was 13 days ago. That's how recently we're talking in the timeline. 13 days ago, and then in the meantime, still trying to go to local authorities as well, when one might argue that focusing solely on Leinster House, trying to maybe have the 3rd or 4th or 5th meeting that gets you over the line might have been a bit constructive as well. There were other extenuating circumstances. There was a family bereavement in the middle of things as well, so she wasn't able to go to some of the local authorities that she'd have liked, or to spend as much time in Leinster House, and that's not ideal either. But it was late in the day. Which is one of the things that, again, discriminates when it's people who are coming from outside of the Oireachtas themselves. Because, again, if you need to be chaperoned and you need to be sponsored to get in, can you really be going in there for weeks or months at a time, the way that a backbench TD could?
But there's one point about that. TDs and senators don't sleep in the Dáil. You can go around to people's houses as well, like the rest of us do. So you don't have to be in the bubble of Leinster House to meet public representatives. You can go to their counties, which shows what I call putting in the legwork, like we all have to do when we want to get elected.
Would you be in favour of changing the nomination process or changing how you qualify?
Well, I'm just thinking there what Michael's saying. I'm reminded of the Shannon election process where candidates effectively, I think I ended up doing 2,500 miles in 7 days when I was running for the Shannon, calling to people's houses. So you're right in terms of, again, showing people respect in terms of how you actually win their votes. Look, at the end of the day, back in 2018, we had 6 candidates on the ballot paper, right? The vast majority of them, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael did not contest in 2018. 2018. Obviously, we had Michael D. Higgins, who was a Labour candidate in 2011, recontesting. There was space then for candidates to come through. The reality is that parties have made up their minds this time out. That had an impact on the decisions of local authorities.
Would you be in favour, would the Labour Party be in favour of at least having a conversation about changing the system, that it's a number of councillors as opposed to a number of councils? It might suit you as a small party now.
Well, look, I think, to be honest, yeah, we can have that conversation. But we have to bear in mind here, right, there was 166 TDs in 2018 when those candidates were trying to get the nominations, right? There's now 174. As I said at the start, the bar is set extraordinarily low in terms of a candidate getting those nominations. So, I think we're having this conversation because one person came close, but again, still didn't get enough, and that's the end of the matter. And we have to now. I want to talk now about the presidential campaign. We only have a few short weeks. We have 3 candidates. I'm obviously backing Catherine Connolly, given that Michael's given the plug.
We'll hear from all 3 of them on Monday in the debate. Gavin, you want to jump in there?
I was just making the point that Independent Ireland, who we know relatively belatedly got on the bus with Maria Steen yesterday, immediately as soon as the gong fell at 12 o'clock today, announced that they were going to start drafting a constitutional referendum bill to try and literally change those laws to, as you say, include the role of MEPs and also to allow a broader spate of councillors, not just those within councils. I think that whatever about the arguments for including MEPs as treating them as tantamount to Oireachtas members when they're not, there is an argument for having a broader slate, because if you can command, for example, 80 councillors out of a nationwide slate of 949, it does prove that at least you're not a total chancer, that you do have some backing. There is one kind of interesting side note to it, though, which is that almost specifically the terms that Independent Ireland are proposing are precisely the ones that would have got Maria Steen over the line. If you allowed MEPs as well, you'd have gotten Kieran Malooly, you might have gotten Michael McNamara, and there were at least 70 signatories the last time that I saw in a letter trying to get her over the line, including Michael's son and nephew. Another 10 could easily have gotten on board, and then you have 80. So you might even think of it as possibly a referendum that Maria Steen might argue for a yes vote.
The other element to this that is worth considering, though, I think, is, and I appreciate this is slightly abstract, there's a trend that's emerged in this country, and it's more evolved in other countries, and it's this idea that the political system doesn't work for us anymore, and it's actually actively working against us. I guess populism is kind of in a nutshell. And to the people online who seek to amplify that message, this is grist to their mill. They jumped all over that today.
And I think what'll be interesting is where that goes in future now, because this is the last electoral outlet for the next 3.5 years. I mean, it's a similar argument that you can make about some of the other high-profile candidates, like a certain mixed martial artist who withdrew the candidate 2 weeks ago, but said that this was just the start. Well, the obvious acid test for how popular this is and where you can go anywhere is, can you win elections? And barring perhaps a dull by-election or two, we don't have any electoral outlet at all for the next 3.5 years. So where does that energy go? Might there eventually be a referendum where you can reanimate this discussion around whether politics is too exclusionary? Will it just, fall by the wayside by Wednesday or Thursday, and next week we'll be talking about something else entirely? Is this gobbling up a certain amount of bandwidth that we just don't have otherwise? But it will be interesting to see where that energy goes when there is no election immediately to try and direct it to it.
Yeah, and look, I think the reality is as well, people saying that democracy is not working anymore for them, or the political system isn't working. There's an enormous amount of anger and frustration out there. Fine Gael are into their 4th term of government, obviously, initially propped up and now joined by Fianna Fáil. So, and enormous failures in our country in terms of housing, in terms of climate, in terms of even low pay, and so I think that reaction to the state failing is because people are fed up with the government.
Yeah, but what you want out of that reaction, how you want that to manifest then, is support for opposition parties. I guess the fear we have when we look at it in other countries is that actually how it manifests is that people take an attitude of a plague on all your houses. Yeah. The system has actually failed us, which would be really toxic. We talk about toxicity for democracy. I'm not sure Maria Steen's kind of failure today qualifies, but that would.
Well, look, my own constituency in Dublin Central actually saw an increase in turnout for a whole variety of reasons in the general election, and I think there's a story there in terms of... That was
because of Jerry Hutch.
Yeah, well, but I suppose the point is, that at the end of the day, right, I suppose if you have candidates and parties animating people,
Jerry Hutches in constituencies up and down the country.
I think that there's a whole number of factors there, right? But the key thing here is that people are looking for, you know, an alternative.
Hold
right?
on 1 second. Are you forgetting things? You're saying people are looking for an alternative. There was a little matter of an election.
I know,
last
I'm
November.
acknowledging that.
And just because he lost and he didn't form a government, you were saying there's anger out there. Like if you were to take what was going on online before the last election, and if you were to take that as being the gospel, every single solitary person that was inside in Dáil would have lost, including you and me, because it was a plague on everybody's houses. And
well,
at the
I
end
wasn't
of the day,
in the Dáil, you see.
Well,
this is the
sorry,
thing.
your predecessor. Everybody, we all would have been
didn't have
As a
gone.
member of the Shannon, she was a total outsider at the time.
No, but what I'm trying to say is every person that was there would be gone. But the long and the short of it was,
actually,
democracy is great. An election was called. There was many people from different places who thought that they were going to sort the world out, and they went before the people. And the people will decide who they want. And that's called democracy.
Yeah.
And whether you win or whether you lose, you have to suck it up and blow it out in bubbles. And whether you finish up in government or you finish up in opposition, the people are the bosses at the end of the day.
Sure, I'm not disagreeing with you, Michael,
but
in
I
any
mean,
shape or
the way
form.
you were talking about this anger being out there,
No,
of
but-
course, there's always going to be concern, but that gets sorted when there's an election because the people are given a choice as to who they want to represent them, and the people that are able to have the wherewithal to put together a government, that's it then until the time the next election is
Yeah,
done.
but I think when you
It's
look
as
at the
simple as
results,
that.
I think when you look at the results of the election as well, right, and the government you're now part of as well, you know, we have Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, obviously much smaller parties compared with previously, and I suppose that the opposition has grown to a much greater extent. So there's no doubt, I'm not disputing who's in government at the moment, but what I'm also saying, and I think it feeds into some of the notion about the system is failing, is a frustration that the problems that are endemic in this country, and there's a lot of good things happening, but there's also very serious problems. Like we had a motion today before the Dáil on child poverty, on child homelessness, which the government voted down, by the way. And ultimately, these are very serious issues, and people are giving, you know, are articulating that anger at the moment.
Very serious issues that we will continue to discuss. Lots of people getting in touch, as you'd imagine. I actually think the nomination process is fine. It makes sense that candidates for an office that reviews legislation should require the confidence of legislators to get on the ballot. The problem is that we ever started using the process to add candidates to the ballot just for the sake of it. And somebody else, though. The government wrapped this up by blocking their members in one way or another against voting outside the parties, and then they call it democratic. Anyway, we can keep those views coming. We're going to have to take a very short break. But as a reminder, Virgin Media Television's election coverage will include a Tonight Show presidential debate next Monday with all three candidates here in studio from 10 on Virgin Media 1 and Virgin Media Play.